discuss the case. It's okay?
Okay, sir. Okay.
Please. So who's presenting?
The doctor का नाम क्या है?
Who is presenting this case? Please introduce yourself.
A very good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Amrita Srivastava. I'm representing the Department of ENT, GSVM Medical College, Kanpur.
And the two people will be discussing this case. One is the Dr. Hardeep Malhotra, and number two is Dr. Amit
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So along with the ENT representation, we have medicine, opthal and radiology department also present here with us. Hello.
Yeah, please start the case.
So a very good afternoon, everyone. So now we are beginning with our session. So am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. Please continue.
Okay. So amongst this COVID and mucormycosis havoc, we at GSVM are also looking after mucor patients on a daily basis. We have a array of patients with varied presentations here with us, but in particular, we have chosen this patient that we are going to present just to see that when it comes to the diagnosis of mucormycosis, it has to be not just a single modality on which the diagnosis can be made, but it should be a triangulated approach based on our clinical examination on the radiology and the microbiology. So let me walk you through this case. A 54-year-old male who is a known case of type 2 diabetes mellitus since 8 years was on regular medication. He was taking his oral hypoglycemic drugs. He had history of COVID infection on 19th of April, for which he was taking treatment. He was in home isolation. He did not need any hospital admission or ICU admission. There was no oxygen dependency. There was no use of any immunomodulators, but there is use of steroid. The patient is giving history of a prolonged use of around 15 days of steroid. The dose he does not know. There are no documents available to verify that what dosage and duration the patient has taken steroids. But as per the history, he has taken steroid treatment for 15 days. This patient, after his COVID infection, 1 month later, he presents to our emergency with history of right-sided facial pain for 10 days, difficulty in biting food and loosening of tooth in the right upper jaw since 10 days, and loss of sensation over the cheek since 5 days. There was no history of nasal obstruction, discharge, bleed, blackening over the nose or inside of mouth. There was no pain or redness in the eye. There was no history of blurring of vision, headache, fever, cough, shortness of breath, or there was no history of any pain in the abdomen, nausea, vomiting, or any history suggestive of GI bleed. So when the patient was examined, there was hyposthesia present over the right cheek region. The oral cavity examination revealed the loosening of right upper canine. On nasal cavity examination, we could not see any blackening. The mucosa appeared grossly normal. There was no black necrotic or eschar tissue there. In the orbit examination also, the vision was normal. The movements were not restricted. There was no proptosis, no edema, nothing. But because the patient had a history of COVID and prolonged use of steroids, and the history was suggestive, so there was a high suspicion of mucormycosis. For that, the patient was subjected to gadolinium enhanced MRI of the nose, paranasal sinuses, and the orbit, which revealed a mucosal thickening in the right maxillary sinus with non-enhancing T2 hypotense intense areas, especially in the right side maxillary antrum. The lesion was extending into the right premaxillary, the retromaxillary, and the pterygopalatine fossa approach. The lesion was extending. It was just reaching up to the floor of the right orbit. There was no involvement of the muscles. The cavernous sinus was normal. So the MRI was suggestive of invasive sinusitis, query fungal. Simultaneously, so these are the MRI images. If you want, we can go through the radiology in detail. We have our radiologist here with us. Or should we just continue with the case? Hello?
Continue with the case, Dr. Ankita.
So then we'll take up the radiology later when we are done with the case. So simultaneously, the patient was taken up for diagnostic nasal endoscopy. Despite the high suspicion of mucormycosis, to our surprise, the mucosa was absolutely normal. The mucosa of the turbinates, the septum, the uncinate was normal. There was no eschar tissue seen. So we took a deep biopsy. A deep tissue was taken from the middle turbinate and was sent for KOH stain, but it turned out to be negative. There was no fungal hyphae seen. So we again took up the patient for biopsy in OT, and this time we did uncinectomy and middle meatal and trostomy. When we opened the antrum, we saw a yellowish polypoidal mass lying into the antrum along with some eschar tissue. This was taken and sent for KOH mount and histopathology, which turned out to be positive. There was broad aseptate fungal hyphae with wide angle branching seen, which suggested the class Zygomycetes mucor. On the basis of clinical our diagnosis and the MRI, the patient was finally made, the patient was of stage 2B, and we planned the treatment. So in collaboration and in consultation with our medicine.
Dr. Ankita, sorry to stop you in between. You said that the patient has loosening of teeth. So you didn't do anything about the teeth because mainly here the bone of the pre-maxilla was involved, or as compared to history, inside the maxilla was also involved. So
Yes.
did you do a maxillectomy, or did you remove the teeth to remove the involved bone? Because that was the presenting complaint, or you are planning a second stage surgery for that?
So we are just coming up to our surgical management.
Okay, right.
So let me talk about the medical management. In consultation with the medical management, with the medicine people, the insulin was started to control the blood sugar because patient was a known diabetic, and amphotericin B liposomal infusion was started, advised by the medicine people with pre and post hydration. So now comes the surgical management. So the patient was planned for surgical debridement, extensive surgical debridement. And for this particular case, we have planned for endoscopic Denker's, modified Denker's approach, seeing the involvement of the retromaxillary and the pterygopalatine fossa. Hello. Sir, I'm just give me a second. My presentation is in the hang mode. Hang हो गया sir. So sorry with the presentation. It's there's some technical issue with it. But are we still audible?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
you are audible. If there is an issue with the video, what you can do is you can shift on to the next slide, please.
Hello.
Yes, you are audible. You can shift on to the next slide if there is a problem.
So should I resume?
Power off.
You can play the video directly.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You can play the video directly.
Yes, sir.
Just go on the slide.
Patient was taken up for this endoscopic Denker's approach.
ये तो images दिखा रहा है.
Video है नहीं वो.
So Dr. Ankita, you can
Some technical issues.
you can just describe that what you did.
You just describe.
Describe what you did.
Sir, can you please be a bit loud?
Just describe. Just describe. Forget about the video.
We have planned the patient for endoscopic Denker's, and we have given the incision over the lateral wall, just over the, hello?
Yes.
Yes, yes, you are audible.
We have given the incision over the lateral wall, just above the inferior turbinate, and did the debridement of the tissues of the lateral wall, approach the piriform sinus, and then extend the, and we elevated the flap over the anterior lateral wall of the maxilla. Then we did, just, hello? Am I audible, sir?
Yes,
Yes, yes.
yes, you are audible. Carry on.
We drilled the anterolateral wall of the maxilla and approached the maxillary antrum and debrided the bone, and we encountered the NLD, and we cut the NLD just at the level of the orbital floor and did the debridement of the whole anterolateral wall and the medial wall. We could see in the figure, can you just put that figure again? In the second figure, we are seeing the posterior wall of the maxilla, and we could see the fungal debris over it. Then we removed the medial part of the posterior wall of the maxilla and approached the pterygopalatine fossa. There was some necrotic material in the pterygopalatine fossa. We debrided it with the help of the debrider, controlled the maxillary artery, and then did the debridement of the ethmoid and the sphenoidal part. We could see some necrotic material over the floor of the sphenoid, which was dealt with, debrided, and drilling was done. There was no involvement of the V2 or median nerve in this case. So debridement of the sinuses along with the middle turbinate and extensive debridement of the anterolateral wall, medial wall, along with NLD and pterygopalatine fossa was done in this case.
Right, sir. My initial questions remains that was something done to the pre-maxilla because the loosening of teeth was there.
When we raised the flap over the anterolateral wall,
Yes, sir.
we could see some slight necrotic material which was debrided with the help of the debrider. There was no extensive involvement of the pre-maxillary space.
Okay.
Dr.
Right.
Amit is there?
Yes, sir. I'm here, sir.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Nishant.
Okay. Okay. Yes, sir. So, I mean, this case was set up that the patient has diabetic since last 8 years and also has undergone COVID. And so it was a set case. Hardeep, sir, you want to say something, sir? So considering the extent of the disease, it was well managed because we needed to go into the posterior wall of the maxillary sinus, and the GSVM team, ENT team has done I think, good job to remove the posterior wall of maxilla. In fact, the interior and lateral wall was also removed, the posterior wall also removed. So the maxillary sinus was removed and the tissue was debrided. So you are planning to give how much amphotericin B to this patient, sir?
We are planning to give about 2 to 3 grams of amphotericin for this patient. We planned the patient for doses of about 5 mg per kg. And since it was done about 2-3 days back, So we have given around 400, 500 mg of doing fine till now.
Okay. So what is your plan for endoscopic assessment? I mean, how frequently?
We assess the patient on alternate days. We did the nasal douching of the patient, and we on alternate days we do endoscopy of the patient in the OT to see for any residual disease or something coming up.
Yes, sir. So because of the extensive debridement, there is always blood clots and other areas.
Yeah.
So it's better to do a multiple at least suction and cleaning, and
We are doing alternate days.
so post-operative management is equally important as the operation.
Yeah.
Can we take the next case? So we can take the next case.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. So the next case will be presented by the Department of Ophthalmology. I request Dr. Parvez.
So, can we have Professor Divya Mehrotra for the second case?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
The next case has to be presented by Dr. Divya from KGMC.
Yeah, Dr. Divya, please go ahead.
Screen visible?
Yeah,
Is
they are
my
visible.
screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So this is Professor Divya Mehrotra from King George's Department of Oral and Maxillofacial Surgery. So I'll be sharing my experience. Till now, I think we have seen more than 200 patients, and we have operated about 35 patients in maxillofacial surgery department. And we have seen a wide variety of patients ranging from, if you see, there's hardly any involvement in the palate, in the oral cavity. We have seen patients where there's only small fenestration in the palate, or there may be ulceration in the palate, peeling of the palatal mucosa. And in some cases, we have seen almost half of the palate has been involved. So wide variety of cases have been seen by us. In some cases, it's only the mobility of the teeth, and if you see here, it's only the alveolus part which has been involved, along with the buccal and the palatal side involvement. We check for the mobility, and we see what all teeth are and what all part of the bone is also along with the teeth they are involved. So upon checking clinically and checking for the mobility, we have to make a plan. So we have also seen patients where we have involvement of bilateral palate. So almost the anterior and posterior part of the palate is involved in few cases. And looking at the CT scan, we see how the not only the palate but also the facial part, that means the anterior wall of maxilla, the anterolateral wall and the posterolateral, all three are involved in few cases. If I want to share, let me see if I can share the CT scan of a patient where we found that the entire
Ma'am, can
facial
we go to the index case, ma'am, for the benefit of the audience,
Okay.
if there is one particular case?
Okay. So coming to the patient we want to discuss today is this 62 years female. She reported to our department with a chief complaint of diffuse pain on the right side of the jaw and mobility of teeth and pus discharge from the right infraorbital region, which she had for the last 10 years. Medical history, she had type 2 diabetes for last 4 years, and the sugar at the time was 632. She didn't have any ICU stay, not aware if she had any steroids, because she hardly had any information if she had COVID. Though she had fever in the month of April for 2-3 days, but she didn't report that she had COVID. She started having eye symptoms around the end of May, and she was admitted for this reason. So when she presented to us, we found that there was pus draining out from the infraorbital region, and she could hardly open her eyes because of the lot of infection and inflammation in the periorbital region. When we checked through the CT scan, we found that there was loss of the palatal bone as well. And to give you a clear picture through the CT, so what we see here, her palate had little involvement, but if you see on the buccal side, the teeth were mobile and there was a lot of bone loss in the alveolar, buccal alveolar side, not only from the incisor region, but up to the extending up to the molars. And if you see here the palatal involvement, you can visualize that. So little amount in the posterior palate involvement. And so we planned, as we planned for all the cases, we planned apart from the medical management, the surgery was planned to debride the area aggressively with removal of the teeth, involved teeth. So when she came to us, the picture she presented, so there was, as we saw earlier, there was pus draining out from the extraoral region. So apart from the intraoral, we also had to drain this pus. So if you can see, I think there is a bit of lag. Can you see the movie?
No, ma'am, we are not able to.
Okay.
I think it's not playing.
Okay. So let's see the next slide. I will move on to the next slide then. So what we found, as we saw intraorally, these teeth were mobile, and if you can see here, the alveolar bone on the buccal as well as on the palatal side was all necrosed. We had to debride all this bone. Her palatal mucosa was normal, and only the extraction of the teeth and the removal of the necrosed bone was done. And this is the amount of teeth and the sinus mucosa and the necrosed bone which was removed. And after removal of the teeth, we do an obturator, and similarly for her also, we designed an obturator and placed it so that there is no contamination of oral fluids into the area, debrided area. So we got the test done. This was the hyphae as seen in the microbiology department, and this is on the fungal culture. The pus which we drained from the extraoral infraorbital region showed the growth of Klebsiella, and accordingly she was on broader spectrum antibiotic for till now. And this is her, so I'll again take to the movie directly because otherwise it's not playing. So this is her post-op. All this infection has settled down, and now her vision is also there, so that we are happy that we could also with good drainage and debridement, the vision is saved. So this about the patient. Anything if you...
So, Dr. Divya, very well managed case. The lesson here is for every ENT surgeon is that the disease in most of the cases is starting either in the maxilla or into the ethmoid sinuses. If it is in the maxilla, you have to examine the teeth, as madam has shown that what is the mobility of teeth in each and every case just before the surgery, because the CT scan can be a little older, maybe 5 or 7 days, or the MRI may be normal, 5 to 7 days. The disease progression is so high that you have to see the mobility of teeth. Otherwise, you do an incomplete surgery, and you have to then take the patient again for an inferior maxillectomy or something. So it's better to examine on table, and then also like in the madam case, if you have a pre-made prosthesis, then after the removal of teeth and maxilla, we can fit that so that the patient start eating orally, right, ma'am?
Yes, yes.
So so it is important to take a multidisciplinary team, or at least I mean, when there is a mobility of teeth, then at least if maxillofacial facilities are not available, our dental surgeon can also chip in for the making of previous prosthesis, because it's very important that the patient can eat very well with this kind of customized prosthesis. And later on, when the healing happens, you will put a permanent obturator. Am I right, ma'am? You can also put the
So
implant to.
Once, yes, that's the plan. So once the healing is good and we are happy with the healing part, then we can place implants and give the prosthesis so that the patient is able to eat as well.
And do you expect that in this case that it was not a post-COVID, maybe that the patient had some sinus infection, osteomyelitis earlier happening before the COVID also, and it get aggravated?
Yes, that could have happened because patient was from a rural background. She had fever. She didn't get admitted. So we can't really say that because we don't have the RT-PCR report that
Yes.
patient doesn't know whether she had COVID or not. But we can assume that yes, because this is the regular presentation which we are seeing post-COVID, and in the same time period she had fever and later on presented with this. So things give us a suspicion, and we draw our management plan based on that on those lines only.
Issues ID, yeah, just find out whether they're able to identify the issues.
So
I
there is
have
a question
ma'am,
by.
which is in general ma'am, can you throw some light on this fact that how should these patients be managed in terms of the dressing or irrigation? Because we have been seeing in our past sessions that people have been asking about how to irrigate, whether a dressing is required or not. Can you please shed some light on this thing, ma'am?
Thank you, Doctor. So what is important is once we debride the area, so we are also not doing maxillectomy. We are trying to maintain as much bone as possible and debriding the each case so that the amount of nidus present there is removed, and repeated dressings are required. Now these dressings can be, as we do in cases of osteomyelitis, we can do irrigation. Every day patient is called back and we are doing the irrigation. Now what are the things which can be used for irrigation? It could be just betadine solution, but we prefer to do hydrogen peroxide irrigation and then lots of saline irrigation. So this way we ensure that the entire area is clean, and then the dressing, preferably it should be amphotericin B dressing, but because in this where there is so much a scarcity of amphotericin, we are doing iodoform dressing. So this iodoform dressing is placed, and over that we place the obturator. So every alternate day the obturator is removed, the dressing is removed, irrigation is done, and then again redressing and obturator placed. So this is how I recommend that the post-op follow-up should be. Lots of irrigation, and sometimes it may need repeated debridement as well. So you should be ready if you see an additional area where the bone you thought initially is bleeding and is taking up, but maybe with the in the follow-up period that bone also may become necrose. So you have to check for that if it is healing, it's the trend is towards healing or it's getting worse. So accordingly you have to change your plan maybe sometime and do a repeated debridement, and then irrigation and dressing is important along with the obturator. This is for the time being when we are planning our the healing to occur. So after that we have to plan again for the reconstruction.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. If there is any other question, we can entertain that.
I just wanted to know, madam, what was the isolate? Was your microbiologist able to identify the species?
I have this slide here. If Prashant is here, he would like to comment on this.
No, Dr. Prashant is not here. I think they had isolated mucor,
So the
but
report
I'm
is
not.
yes.
We will need to check it with Dr. Prashant for this.
Yeah.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Can I start, sir? Hello.
Okay.
Am I audible?
Audible.
Yeah. I'm Dr. Parvez Khan from Ophthalmic HOD, Ophthalmic Department, GSB Medical College. Here I'll not be presenting any case presentation as such, but I'd like to stress on certain points. There are certain differential diagnoses which has to be excluded before going for a diagnosis for orbital mucormycosis. For instance, just a few days back, 8-year-old child came with bilateral proptosis and netosis and everything, and chemosis. And there was a huge hue and cry by the media that an 8-year child has developed mucormycosis. But on doing a routine blood examination and CT, MRI, we found that it was a case of an AML, a rare condition found in children. So you have to rule out many things. For instance, if you're having bacterial orbital cellulitis, aspergillosis, or non-infectious causes like pseudotumor, mucosal invasion, thyroid eye disease, lacrimal gland neoplasm, all these cases present with ptosis or proptosis, the chemosis. So you should have keep this in mind before going for a diagnosis. Now, as we all know, this orbital involvement comes through maxillary sinus. First, the maxillary sinus is involved, then through the ethmoidal sinus, ethmoidal foramina and breakage of the lamina praepatia, and through the nasolacrimal duct, it goes in through the middle orbital bar, and the orbit is involved. The structures which are involved are medial rectus, optic nerve head, and orbital apex syndrome. Now, how does normally a case of orbital mucormycosis present? The usual presentation is facial or periorbital swelling or numbness, blurred vision, chemosis, ptosis, proptosis, diplopia, complete ophthalmoplegia, corneal anesthesia, and loss of vision, which could be due to...
sorry, you have any presentation, sir? Because we are not able to see.
Presentation you can't see?
No.
Presentation. 2 minutes, sir. 2 minutes. Sir, we have already shared our screen.
No. The PowerPoint has not yet opened. You open the PowerPoint and then share your screen, sir.
PowerPoint open the PowerPoint. Is it?
Just stop share first.
Stop share and then open the presentation and then share again.
Up share again.
Sure.
And select the PowerPoint. Now take. It's okay.
Now is the PowerPoint there?
Yes. You make it slideshow now.
It's okay enough. Is it okay, sir?
Okay.
These are the photographic presentation how orbital mucormycosis look like. Now, we have already discussed what's the treatment of giving IV amphotericin B. And now, coming to the main point, AIIMS Rishikesh has given this staging where, and according to the stage, the treatment should be directed. For instance, as far as ophthalmology is concerned, when there's a stage 3, that's the involvement of the orbit, then we have stage 1A where nasolacrimal duct, middle orbit of vision is unaffected. Stage B where diffuse orbital involvement less than 1 quadrant, vision is still unaffected. And stage 3C when either you have a central retinal artery occlusion or you have the superior ophthalmic vein thrombosis or involvement of superior orbital fissure. That means involvement of nerves or involvement of artery. That means either you have symptoms like congenital chemosis or isolated ocular motility restriction, ptosis, proptosis, infraorbital nerve anesthesia, central retinal artery occlusion, feature of ophthalmic artery occlusion, or superior ophthalmic vein thrombosis. These are the signs which states that we are in stage 3C. The AIIMS Rishikesh recommends that at stage 3C, we should go directly for exenteration. But since exenteration is a very disfiguring surgery and leads to a lot of mental stress, mental trauma to the patient, even post-op, even if the patient survives. So we have tried, and since we have a lot of patients, we have 27 patients of orbital mucormycosis at present. So we tried to change the strategy a bit. And we have tried, there are a few papers on this, few case reports on this, where they have tried retrobulbar amphotericin B injection 1 ml. So what we do in those patients, even in stage 3C or D, even if the vision is not there, we are giving 1 ml retroorbital 1 ml amphotericin B injection, and we keep a serial photograph. We measure the IOP, we serially assess the neurological assessment is done, and we see for its complication like for post-injection inflammation or orbital compartment syndrome, and weekly MRI is done, where T1 and T2 images is done. If the MRI suggests on T1 that a lot of necrosis is more than the inflammation, then we change our strategy and we go for exenteration. But if the inflammatory part is much more than the necrosis, then we keep on alternate day amphotericin B injection. In this way, we have been able to, there's a few photographs, you can see it. This pre-injection and post-injection. This lady you can see, there's a remarkable improvement in this lady. Though she has got only PL positive and this total ophthalmoplegia is there, but still we have been able to save her eyes from exenteration. From the 24 eyes, we have been only we have done exenteration only in three cases, and one case is for exenteration is planned for tomorrow. For the rest 17 cases, we have been able to prevent exenteration by repeated alternate day amphotericin B injection. This is the few photographs showing the steps of exenteration. Few of our patients presented with no orbital symptoms other than CRAO, bilateral CRAO or optic neuritis. Now the question arises that in case of this is a CRAO, and this one patient we have found that who has presented with optic neuritis, because again a paper has been found. We have seen one paper where perineal invasion has been also been reported by mucormycosis. Now there is a question to the panel: what in this case, this particular case of optic neuritis? Now the treatment should be IV methylprednisolone, but since this patient is mucor positive, should we go for IV methylprednisolone or should not?
No, sir. I mean, Alok sir, can you?
In presence of active fungal infection, at least before surgery, without a proper debridement and adequate antifungal therapy, it's quite obvious that high-dose methylprednisolone, which is required actually in cases of optic neuritis, cannot be used in para-infectious, that too fungal. As far as my thinking is concerned, Professor Hardeep might like to comment.
Yeah, as far as the involvement of the nerve is concerned, I agree with you that you've been giving amphotericin B injections over there, but there is, this part is actually controversial because if exenteration is required, giving injections might not be very successful. Okay, I'll tell you that we have more than 40 patients now where this has been tried. There is definitely improvement in these cases, but the problem is when the disease progresses, then you do need to exenterate the eye. This is one thing. Regarding the occurrence of CRAO, this is a very nice observation because, almost 25% of our patients, they have been presenting with CRAO, and this is one such condition where the eye does not require any intervention. the only thing like the insufflation technique or some things other in order to preserve the eye can be done, but since you cannot preserve the vision, nothing can be done. Regarding the last question, I agree with Dr. Alok that there is no data on the use of corticosteroids. Use of concomitant use of corticosteroids has been documented with aspergillus, but not with mucor. So this will be an extremely dicey situation of when we are planning to use this thing. Now the issue here remains is why it actually occurs. This is occurring because if you have an MRI of this patient, we can discuss this thing. Most of these patients are having this thing because of actual permeation of the nerve. So when there is an actual permeation of the nerve, the problem is that the infection stays there and it becomes unlikely that it would lead to any improvement of the nerve. So the thing stays is that if there is an involvement along with any evidence of infection at the level of cone, the best thing is to exenterate the eye if there is an evidence. If there is no evidence, then it is like on the own clinician choice, steroids may be given, but they have not been recommended as of now.
Sir, I just want to comment on what the sir has said, that we have a patient of 8-year-old with all the symptom of mucormycosis, but again, that's a orbital cellulitis. So in children, I mean, you should consider the differential diagnosis like any malignant lesions or like dermatomyosarcoma, like rarely AML. But the orbital cellulitis is quite common in children, and we have 2 patients right now admitted, one in ophthalmology ward and one has with us, which are referred to us as mucormycosis. The other thing, the tram works well in borderline cases, but the results are not very encouraging when there is a frank orbital involvement, as sir has said, Hardeep sir. So better that debridement or endoscopic debridement or the excision is done. And for tram, we need the classical deoxygelate, and it's like we can prepare 10 ml and then take 0.7 ml of that tram and then inject, and sometimes it's painful, but there you have to also ensure that the orbital compression syndrome does not happen. Although the volume is less, but sometimes it is very irritating, and the patient, you have to counsel patient that the patient may have some swelling immediately after the injection. And I think
that we are taking care of.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Should we continue with the retroorbital regimen, or should we go for more of exentration?
Sir, I think that in borderline cases, you can go with this tram because if you do for 5 cases, maybe it will be successful in 3 cases, but maybe 1 or 2 need exentration, then lesser number of exentration would be required because that's the last stage to do. But if there is a frank involvement of all the muscles and all that, then it's better to do the exentration. So if there is only a CRAO and there is mild orbital involvement, you can definitely go for tram. But if all the muscles and optic nerve is involved, there is orbital apex involvement, then it's better to go for exentration.
So those patients who have undergone exentration, we hardly find any necrotic element there.
Yeah, but this is where you will be helped with the radiology.
Radiology, MRI is the sir. I can show cases, sir, where we have not done the orbital exentration, where we have done orbital exentration, and when we don't do the orbital exentration, what complications can happen. I will, in the end of the, sir is, Alok sir is presenting the pharmacotherapy of this mucormycosis, because there was a question on which antifungal to use. Thank you, Parvez sir, for the, presenting from the ophthalmologist point of view and enriching us of the various involvement and what to do when. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So, so Hardeep sir would also agree, sir, that we are getting patchy supply of amphotericin B, and sometimes we get classical. So there was a question on classical. Classical is also had same activity. The only thing is that you have to manage the electrolytes and the serum creatinine more frequently with the classical one. Otherwise, even the government of India has issued guidelines that all three formulation like liposomal, lipid complex, and deoxychelate had same efficacy apart from a little side effect. And if you do pre-medication, the side effects are less. The only thing, the therapy duration may increase if you use the classical amphotericin B.
Yeah, I agree with these things, and that is also the reason that all those patients who are having renal functions which are intact, especially if the GFR is in excess of 60 ml, then it is usually preferable if the conventional preparation is there to continue that. Only in situations if there are renal dysfunctions or an associated contraindication should be shifted on to a liposomal preparation. I think Professor Aloknath will shed more light on this thing.
Good afternoon to all of you, and thank you everyone for a very nice and lucid case presentations, which have been really managed very nicely. I'll briefly describe the pharmacological therapy of mucormycosis, COVID-associated mucormycosis. We all know that it's a life-threatening invasive fungal disease due to mucorales disorder, fungi. The rhino-orbitocerebral is the most common form. It's somehow most common in diabetic patients. However, pulmonary and disseminated disease are most commonly seen in other immunosuppressed patients, like the patients with hematological malignancy, post-bone marrow transplantation, and cutaneous forms are common in patients having trauma. Other sites, that is gastrointestinal, endocarditis, osteoarticular, or cerebral infections are less frequent. Surgery with aggressive fungal therapy and reversal of immunosuppression is the mainstay of treatment. The major concern in antifungal therapy of mucormycosis is that the breakpoint, the clinical breakpoints for antifungal therapy have not been clearly described, as it is for bacterial infections and other fungal infections. The reference method used commonly is the broth microdilution method by UCAST, as suggested by UCAST and CLSI. Amphotericin B, posaconazole, isavuconazole have shown good in vitro activity and clinical efficacy, while voriconazole and echinocandins have been found to be inefficient. I may just say what do you mean by breakpoint? Clinical breakpoint is minimum in individual concentration at which 80% of the clinical isolates will be on which more than 80% of the clinical isolates will be effective. The drug will be effective on them. So, in general, poor prognosis of mucormycosis remains poor, with mortality, very high mortality, and which is linked both to the disease as well as the underlying comorbidities. So coming to the drugs, amphotericin B, liposomal amphotericin B is the drug of choice as recommended by European Conference of Infections and Leukemia and European Confederations of Medical Mycology in their guidelines published in 2017 and 19 respectively. And it is the first line treatment recommended in adults. Other lipid formulation, that is ABLC, the amphotericin B lipid complex, could be used in mucormycosis, but without central nervous system involvement, according to ECIL. So it is very clear that liposomal amphotericin B is the drug of choice in all patients, and in patients with central nervous system involvement, other lipid formulations may be best avoided. For neonates and pediatric patients, liposomal amphotericin B and ABLC are strongly recommended for the first-line treatment, and the usual dose is 5 to 7 milligram per kg by body weight. But higher doses, that is about 7 to 10 milligram per kg per day, are used in severe cases and patients with CNS involvement. And for CNS involvement, 10 milligram per kg body weight is the dose which has been recommended by ECMM. And it is strongly recommended that the target dose should be started as a whole, and a slow escalation policy, like going from a smaller dose to a higher dose, should never be done, and the full dose should be started from the first day of treatment. In there is some controversy regarding whether the high dose amphotericin B is actually effective or not. It was seen in a prospective pilot is more effective or not in severe cases. In a prospective pilot study, the response rate of high dose, that is more than 7.5 milligram per day, was 43% as compared to 0% in patients who received lower doses. But overall response rate, that was the immediate response rate, but overall response rate at week 4 and week 12 was comparable. And in another study, liposomal amphotericin B in doses of more than 5 milligram per kg, the response was similar at 4 weeks, but was much better at week 12. So there is some data that higher doses may be more efficacious with liposomal amphotericin B. And it is prudent to note that early treatment should be started, which are associated with better outcomes, because delay in medical therapy has been linked with higher mortality in various case series and case reports. And amphotericin B should be continued until the clinical response is satisfactory. Clinical response is perceived by the treating physician or surgeon, and there is evidence of reversal of immunosuppression. Now, coming to isavuconazole, it has been licensed and approved in US and Europe for the first-time treatment in mucormycosis and is available in oral and IV formulations. It has got minimal or no drug-drug interactions. The cyclodextrin moiety is not there in the IV preparation, so there is no requirement of dose modification for renal disease. There is no adjustment needed for liver failure or obesity, and it has got excellent oral bioavailability with no interference with the various kind of food and beverages. In a case control study which used of historical controls with the Fungiscope registry, isavuconazole showed similar survival in 21 patients compared to 33 matched controls who had received amphotericin B, liposomal amphotericin B. But this trial has got some inherent limitation that there is a sample size was quite small, and this is the only valid study on the basis of which the drug was approved by FDA. However, there is some data about breakthrough mucoral infections in patients who receive isavuconazole. And an enhancement phenomena, which is similar to that of voriconazole, has also been demonstrated, but it needs to be validated in larger animal or other series. Isavuconazole seems to be less hepatotoxic than other azoles and has caused a better tolerance profile than liposomal amphotericin B, but the ECMM has given a moderate recommendation for the use of this agent as a first-line therapy for mucormycosis. Its penetration in blood-brain barrier is good, but in necrotic center of the brain abscesses, the concentration is low. But a recent retrospective study had shown that it is effective in CNS infections, which has to be confirmed in larger studies before we embark upon starting isavuconazole as a drug of or as a preferential therapy in patients with CNS involvement. Coming to posaconazole, posaconazole was available in syrup formulations till recent past, but now it is available in intravenous and delayed release tablets, which has got a better bioavailability. And because of its higher serum concentrations, and the DR tablets and IV formulations are now recommended with moderate strength by ECMM as first line of therapy in places where you do not have isavuconazole and liposomal amphotericin B. Smaller studies show non-inferior results as compared to liposomal amphotericin B for first line mucormycosis. But again, larger studies are needed to draw any conclusion. So as of or a salvage therapy, but in resource limited settings where the first line therapy is not available, it may be utilized as a first line therapy also. It has been strongly recommended that routine therapeutic drug monitoring for posaconazole should be done, but I don't know how much it is possible in our resource limited setups. And it is recommended that trough concentrations of 1 milligram per liter or higher should be obtained for optimal clinical response. Coming to combination therapy is currently not recommended by any society for the first time therapy of mucormycosis because of the lack of evidence of efficacy, but it may represent a major way of increasing the effect of the antifungal treatment in patients who have got very severe involvement. And there have been case reports and various case series where various combinations of polyenes with caspofungin with or with the azoles, which have been tried, and some of them have shown synergy in patients. And one of the majority of these case series have involved patient with rhino-orbital or cerebral forms rather than other forms of mucormycosis. And animal data and in vitro studies have shown synergistic effects with amphotericin B plus caspofungin, posaconazole plus caspofungin, isavuconazole plus caspofungin, and in some animal studies, prolonged survival with the combination of caspofungin with amphotericin B, lipid formulation of amphotericin B has also been demonstrated. But as of now, no therapy, no society recommends it. But there is a catch in this, that in a place where you do not have like lipid formulations, in that scenario, if you have conventional amphotericin B, you can combine it with other, newer triazoles to have a better outcome. But this is only is my personal opinion, and it is not based on any data emerging from previous studies or case series. The doses we are all aware of now. Liposomal amphotericin B we have already discussed. For posaconazole, for oral suspension, the dose was 200 milligrams 6th hourly till the stabilization of disease, and then you can go on to twice 400 milligrams twice daily after stabilization. However, for IV formulations and delayed release tablets, a loading dose of 300 milligram twice daily, followed on day 1, followed by once a day of 300 milligrams is recommended. For isavuconazole, a loading dose of 200 milligram 8th hourly for day 1 and day 2, followed by 200 milligram daily, once a day, has been the recommended doses. Now coming to itraconazole and fluconazole, which people have been talking about amidst the shortage of liposomal amphotericin B and newer triazoles. Fluconazole and itraconazole do not have reliable activity against mucor, and the activity of itraconazole is primarily limited to Absidia species. There are case reports and a small case series of successful management of ROCM along with surgical debridement and itraconazole therapy as a primary antifungal therapy. And azoles have sufficient bioavailability, therefore it can be safely administered orally. And fluconazole has got more than 90% of oral bioavailability, and itraconazole have 55%. Azoles are not strongly recommended with the deranged renal functions and raise urocretin as compared to nephrotoxic amphotericin. It is potentially hepatotoxic when used in long term, and itraconazole is associated with weight gain also. Coming to the duration of treatment. Optimal duration of therapy for mucormycosis is unknown. In general, weeks to months of therapy are given. The targets are the immune defect or immunosuppression should be reversed, such as control of diabetes, resolution of neutropenia, withdrawal of immunosuppression. And therapy in general, it is recommended to be continued till the resolutions of signs and symptoms of infection and substantial radiographical improvement. That is what has been recommended by ECMM and ECIL. However, people have proposed 4 to 6 weeks of suppressive therapy with intravenous drugs followed by oral agents as a continuation therapy, but there is no time frame clearly given by any society. However, it should be noted that when switching to oral tablets nowadays, isavuconazole and posaconazole tablets is strongly supported, and largely the therapy ranging total duration of therapy ranging from 3 to 6 months is generally recommended. So summarizing the whole thing, the drug of choice is liposomal amphotericin in doses of 5 to 7 milligram per kg per day. However, in presence of CNS disease, it should be 10 milligram per kg per day. If liposomal amphotericin B is not available, isavuconazole may be utilized as first line. If both liposomal and isavuconazole is not available, posaconazole may be utilized as first line therapy. If all three are not available, then you are left with one amphotericin B deoxycholate. And in patients with renal insufficiency, isavuconazole or posaconazole, as per availability, may be used in the same order of preference. And if all above are not available, which may be the current scenario in several places, itraconazole may be utilized in the doses of 200 milligrams BD for day 1, followed by 200 milligram OD for 3 to 6 months. Thank you for patient listening. I'll be happy to take any queries and questions.
Thank you, sir, for the insight.
Alok, hello.
Yes, sir.
Alok, what is the status on plasma level monitoring for posaconazole currently in cases of mucormycosis? Are they pushing for the idea of plasma level estimations?
Yes, sir. The European Confederation of Medical Mycology strongly recommends that therapeutic drug monitoring for posaconazole should be done. It strongly recommends, but its availability is the concern. And
in Indian centers, I think we do not have plasma level monitoring anywhere.
And trough level of 1 milligram per liter is recommended for optimal outcomes in posaconazole therapy. But the problem is that that is not available in anywhere near us.
And even for the nephrotoxic component, the IV posaconazole is not pushed in. It is the oral ones or the delayed release ones.
IV preparation of posaconazole does contain that cyclodextrin moiety, which is the main nephrotoxic material.
Yeah. You mentioned about hypokalemia with isovuconazole also in your side effect profile of the drug. So how common is the hypokalemic episode in isovuconazole therapies?
Sir, isovuconazole is associated with, although it has not been enlisted as a very common side effect in the drug leaflet
I was
information.
reading one of the slides that you presented hypokalemia as an element. So I wanted to understand, as compared to amphotericin B, what is the proportion of this hypokalemia with isovuconazole?
I have administered isovuconazole in about more than 10 patients. Hypomagnesemia and hypokalemia both do occur, and levels and supplementation of magnesium, oral magnesium supplementation should be done in all patients who are receiving isovuconazole, because I have seen in all patients. It happens in all patients. More than 10 patients I have used isovuconazole, and it happened in all patients, hypomagnesemia and mild hypokalemia.
Has literature commented on the percentages in the data anywhere?
I could find only one article on isovuconazole and hypokalemia in literature, in which they have not, mentioned upon the frequency of this adverse effect as a.
Does the packet insert mention the percentage of hypokalemia with isovuconazole?
I don't think.
No, product leaflet information doesn't say that.
Dr. Singh.
Yeah.
May I interrupt? So it is there. Actually, it lists that as around 19.1% to be precise.
Okay.
So it is definitely there, and Dr. Alok is right that the listing has been on the lower side because that is the data that was compiled. But in general, when you have been using this thing, you are finding more electrolyte disturbances than they have been listed. So your contention is right. It has been reported in around 20% of the patients.
Okay. Are they also pushing for the idea of plasma level monitoring of or the therapeutic monitoring TDMs for isovuconazole?
No, these kind of recommendations have not been there for isovuconazole as of now, to the best of my knowledge. But for posaconazole, it is definitely there.
Okay.
Okay. So can we have one case presentation from BRD Medical College, Gorakhpur. Can you make them the co-host? Do we have facility for monitoring? We can monitor for
No, it's not available. Most of the centers in India, I think only in some of the corporate hospitals, you will be able to get it in Delhi or Mumbai. But most places you will find it difficult to get it.
Because sir, we are having problem that when we want to step down the therapy and want to discharge the patient are getting post drug is available and how to
TDMs are not available in most of the, I think, government institutes, as
Right.
far as I know.
Right. Thank you, sir. So yes, Gorakh from Gorakhpur, can we go ahead with the presentation?
Am I audible, sir?
Yes.
You are audible.
Dr. Aditi from VRD Medical College. As a part of the post-COVID fungal team, headed by Dr. Ram Kumar, head of Department of Ophthalmology, and Dr. R.N. Yadav, head of Department of ENT. So here we are presenting a case of a patient, 40-year-old male, who is a known diabetic and hypertensive, who presented to us with the chief complaints of pain and swelling over the left cheek, left periorbital pain and swelling, drooping of left eyelid, and loss of vision in left eye for the last 15 days. As alleged by the patient, he was asymptomatic 15 days back when he started developing pain and swelling over the left cheek, which was acute in onset and dull aching and continuous. There was also swelling with mild redness as suggested by the patient. It was also associated with a single episode of blackish material discharge 5 days back when he presented to us from the left nostril. He also developed the left periorbital pain and swelling a day after the left cheek pain and swelling, which the left or periorbital pain and swelling was also acute in onset with dull aching continuous pain. The swelling and the redness of the peribulbar area was progressive in nature, and it was associated with the protrusion of fire, which was also progressive. After a few hours of the periorbital pain and swelling, patient developed drooping of the left eyelid, which was also acute in onset. It initially started as mild drooping of the left eyelid and blurring of vision, which in the next few hours progressed in severity, so much that he had a complete loss of vision in his left eye. It was also associated with the redness of left eye and phimosis. In the past history, patient had COVID-related symptoms, fever, difficulty in breathing, and weakness, though he did not underwent any of the tests for COVID 20 days back and was treated elsewhere. He had a CT done when he had COVID-related symptoms with a CT score of 7/25 and a CORAD grading of 5. There is no history of any hospitalization, oxygen support, and any steroid use. COVID test was done when patient presented to us in our post-COVID fungal OPD, which was positive. So the patient was then shifted to our COVID ward. A repeat test RT-PCR was sent 5 days after the patient was admitted here, which turned out to be negative, and then the patient was shifted to our post-COVID fungal ward. There is no history of any COVID vaccination. Patient is a known diabetic for 5 years, but not on any medication. He is also a known case of hypertension for the last 4 years and also not on any medication. During examination, we found that the vitals were normal. The GCS, full GCS, there were no signs of any meningeal involvement. There was left. Sorry, sir. Okay. The left maxillary and frontal sinus retinalis was present. During the local orbital examination, we found that there was complete ptosis associated with the proptosis, conjunctival congestion, and phimosis. Patient was PL denied in left eye with a hazy cornea. Pupil was normal in shape and sluggish reacting to the light, and all extraocular movement was restricted in all cases. Fundus examination was normal. The orbital ocular examination of the right eye was normal. Routine investigations were sent, which were normal. The RVS of the patient was 461 milligram per PL. HbA1c turned out to be 12.4. So, patient, when he came to us in our post-fungal OPD, he came with a CT scan already done, which showed of old calcified granuloma in the left frontal bone, proptosis of the left eye, along with soft tissue edema and left sinusitis. So these are the pictures from the CT scan when the patient presented to us. So when patient was admitted here, the KH nasal swab for KH was sent, which showed mycelial branched fungal hyphae, which was suggestive of mucormycosis. So diagnostic nasal endoscopy was also done, which showed black necrotic tissue near middle turbinate, inferior turbinate, and bulla epidermis, which was also suggestive of mucormycosis. Patient was then started on IV liposomal amphotericin B at 5 milligrams per kg body weight. The retrobulbar liposomal amphotericin B was also given to the patient in his left eye, but a patient then complained of increase in the pain on the left side while he was on amphotericin. So MRI, brain, orbit, and PNS was repeated. So these are the images from the repeat MRI while the patient was on amphotericin. Sir, MRI findings showed us the edema in the frontal lobe of the brain and hemorrhagic focus with white matter ischemia. There was also soft tissue edema and the sinusitis on the left side. So all sinuses were involved: maxillary, frontal, ethmoid, and sphenoid sinuses, with mucosal thickening in the wall of all the sinuses. Retrobulbar and orbital effects for fat spreading was seen, with intraconal and extraconal involvement and the involvement of all the rectus muscles. So these are the images from the MRI which was done. Sir, then after the MRI was done, patient was taken up for the endoscopic debridement.
And can we go back to see the MRI once again, the previous slide? Yes, the one before. Yeah. Is there any involvement of cavernous sinus? No, cavernous sinus is free. Okay, fine.
But there is some suggestion of, in the previous slide, there is some suggestion of the gyrus rectus on the right side.
Yes, yes, sir.
In the right image. So if we can have if a contrast was done, we can, this part on the right image, the gyrus rectus zone is involved, which is suggestive of basifrontal involvement on the left side. So these are my impressions on the MR. Please go ahead.
So, this can be early cerebritis, sir?
Yeah, it is possible that it is only cerebritis, but the issue is that CNS involvement with mucor may not necessarily involve a lot of destruction. So there is a lot of controversy between whether only permeation is occurring, number one, or it is occurring as a result of organization. So this is where we need to be. If it is occurring in the early phase, we say that this might be the phase of cerebritis, and subsequently it may organize into a full-blown abscess and lead to venous congestion and the development of infarcts.
Right.
Should I go ahead?
Yes.
So after the MRI was repeated, the patient was taken up for the endoscopic debridement, which was done under general anesthesia. So necrotic tissue from the left middle turbinate, inferior turbinate, bulla epidermis, medial wall of the orbit, orbital pad, so middle and the posterior, superior and inferior pad and muscles, and from the cribriform region was debrided. So the subconjunctival, the transconjunctival debridement was also done. And then the patient was packed with antibiotic smear gel foam and antifungal pad. So the necrosis was also seen on the left side of the hard palate, which was removed and was packed with hydrogen peroxide. The IV liposomal amphotericin B was then continued. So these are the detailed findings and pictures from the endoscopy. So there was signs of Ishak formation on the turbinate and the area of the uncinate process. So here we can see, sir, the roof of the nasal cavity, the cribriform region, which was covered in scar in the first pic, and then the part of the septum from the right side. The lower pic is from the part of the septum. So this is a pic from the hard palate mucosa, which was the necrosis was seen on the left side. So the debridement was done, and some mucosal tissue from the middle meatus region was also removed. Sir, fungal debris and disease mucosa was removed from the maxillary antrum. So when ethmoid sacs were opened, there was mucopus was present. The parts of the lamina papyracea was found eroded and unhealthy. The orbital fat, necrosed orbital fat, was also removed with some part of the muscle. And this is a picture from the endoscopy done. So this is a pic of the patient when before the endoscopic debridement and after the endoscopic debridement, there was a visible decrease in the swelling of the left side of the face and periorbital region. So presently, today is the day 2 post-op of the patient. Patient is still on IV amphotericin B with nasal pack in place. Patient is showing improvement ever since in regards with the swelling and the pain. The injection vancomycin, meropenem and metrogyl was also started after consultation with dental and ENT. The final diagnosis was made as rhinoorbital fungal infection.
You can add that there was some cerebral involvement too. And you have to also see that, as Hardeep sir said, that this can develop, this patient can in the later on develop a full-blown abscess. So you have to be careful, otherwise the management is fine. Maybe that there is a debate about the endoscopic debridement of the orbit or maybe the orbital exentration. That decision is left to the surgical team and the ophthalmology team managing it. Any comment, Hardeep sir?
I totally agree with you. My only contention is that we've been given amphotericin B in the dose of 5 milligram. And just before this presentation, Dr. Alok had an excellent presentation on the management, where it has been recommended now to use a higher dose for those who have suggestions of intracranial involvement. So if this is the case, when we review this case after say somewhere between 7 to 14 days, if the suggestion is now definite or we have a contrast which is given, it would be prudent to step up amphotericin to 10 milligram per kilogram body weight. So this is the only thing which I wish to highlight.
So Dr. Abhay?
Yes, sir.
I'm audible?
Yes, yes.
I'm Dr. Anand Yadav from BRD Medical College, ENT department.
Yes, sir.
The finding in MRI, patient had a history of road traffic accident before. This the finding in MRI is because of the old trauma. As per the MRI reports, patient has a lesion in frontal lobe and this cerebrum. One thing.
Yeah, it might be because of this thing, but that is also the reason why we need to give contrast. Okay, if we are giving the contrast, we can probably delineate whether or not the extension is there in contiguity with the nasal sinuses. Okay.
So, I mean, just to clear this case, I have a similar case. I will just share that this patient has a 35-year-old male. On 7th May, there was decreased vision and diagnosed as mucormycosis. Before he could do intervention, on 14th May, he has right cavernous sinus and ICA thrombosis. Patient was known case of DM since 7 years, HB1AC 11.3. On 15th, he get operated and received amphotericin B and isavuconazole, then discontinued because of the non-availability. He was admitted in neurology ward. So just to focus on the point, what has been just discussed, this was the MRI which was done on 7th May. It does not show any intracranial involvement. Just immediately before the operation, the patient has this MRI where there was a gross involvement of the PNS, the ethmoid sinuses, which was not there. Then I'm just moving forward a little ahead. You can see that there is a right cavernous sinus thrombosis. This is the same patient, and then they did the nasal part of the surgery and then tell the patient that he has to receive more amphotericin. Surgery was done outside, and then we did here the contrast scan as said by Hardeep sir. So you can see that in the contrast scan, earlier on this scan, there was some cerebritis here setting in. which was reported as infarct, some cerebritis. But as we went ahead in the time, only 6 to 7 days later, this is the MRI showing of the fungal this. So there was the previous surgeon has done a maxillary. You can see that the clear maxilla, the turbinates and everything has removed, but the only disease remaining is here. And if you see on this was connected to the orbit, So the endoscopic orbital development was done in this case. The point here is that if the orbital exentration was done in this case, because there was gross orbital involvement, even in the previous MRI scan, we could have saved this. So then ultimately, we took this patient and we did a temporal craniotomy with the orbital thing, and then we removed the abscess. So you have to also take care of these things. When here also we went inside the orbit from the lateral side, lateral orbital wall was opened, and this is the optic nerve which is seen, and we debride the entire orbital tissue. So like your case, this was also a case which was done, and so we had to be careful to get an scan after 7 days with a contrast, as the point was mentioned by Hardeep Malhotra sir very nicely, that, and this is the post-op. This patient has some deterioration in the power because of some infarct in the internal capsule. Otherwise, the patient is doing fine. He is the post-op day 5 and is eating well. There is no cranial nerve palsy. Hardeep sir, I mean, this was the point you wanted to highlight, sir.
Yes, excellent demonstration of what we were talking about. This is the thing that if we are going ahead with a contrast, this patient, as was being discussed by the team at Gorakhpur, that the patient had an episode of injury. So if we are doing a contrast and if we are looking at things in perspective, then there is a very high likelihood that we might detect whether or not a continuation can be established. So that's it. Yeah.
So in mucormycosis management, I mean, we should always keep a low threshold if there is any clinical deterioration for a scan. Although recommended is 10 to 14 days, but we can do 7 days or a little less than that. So according to the plan or according to the disease, it is managed well. But considering the involvement of the cribriform plate and the olfactory fibers and the present scan, a scan may be done 5 or 7 days later, or if there is a clinical deterioration earlier, that is what will serve well. And we can increase the doses from 5 to maybe 7, 8, if not 10. That will be helpful for the patient.
Definitely, we are seeing the patient very closely, monitoring the patient very closely. Till now, patient do not have any sign of meningitis, do not have any headache, no any cranial symptoms. Even though we are planning to take a repeat scan after 6 or 7 days. In this patient, we did endoscopic modified Denkers, and through endoscopically, we debride the posterior part of the orbit, which was purely necrosed. We left the globe just for cosmetic purposes.
Right. No, sir, there is no issue. That the case was managed very well. The only thing is that this patient need to be in close follow-up for maybe next 5 to 7 days. If everything goes fine, then no problem. Otherwise, the case was managed very well, sir. No problem at all, sir.
Definitely, there was an area in cribriform plate where there was a dehiscence, and we could see some even dura was necrosed. We did not touch this area just to have do not have CSF leak. But it was in our mind that from here infection can spread to the brain also. But even then we are using only 5 milligram per kg body weight hypodresin B for this patient. If you recommend higher doses, then we can go for higher doses also.
So, as far as the society's recommendations are concerned, directly jumping on to 10 may not be, warranted. But as a surrogate marker, there are two surrogate markers that have been suggested. Number one surrogate marker is if there is bilateral involvement of the eye. Another surrogate marker is early suggestion of cerebritis. So in both these things, if you are finding and the patient has been, diagnosed with mucormycosis, there is, I do not think, if availability is not an issue, you may definitely step up to 10 milligram per kilogram body weight. Yeah.
I think we can close today's session, and it was quite fruitful because we saw the multidisciplinary treatment of mucormycosis, which is the main aim of this all training session by ophthalmologist, by microbiologist, maxillofacial surgeon, and neurologist and neurosurgeon. So with this, we end up this session. If anyone from want to make a comment from KGMU, sir, the closing remark?
No.
Okay,
No.
thank you. So
Thank
we
you
can
so much.
close the
No
session.
further comment.
And just do the feedback form. Thank you.
Thank you,
everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Rajwan,